Hey everyone, how are you doing? Great to see a full house here. Thanks to Emily. I'm Mark Owens, the design director here at the Walker, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to our second talk of this year's Insights Design Lecture Series. This moment here at the beginning of every talk is the moment we take to pause to acknowledge that the Walker Art Center is located on the contemporary, traditional, and ancestral homelands of the Dakota people. Situated on what was once an expanse of marshland and meadow, this site holds meaning for Dakota, Ojibwe, and indigenous people from other Native nations who still live in the community today. As a cultural organization, the Walker works towards building relationships with Native communities through artistic and educational programs, curatorial and community partnerships, and the presentation of new work. For those of you who may be new to the program, the Insights Design Lecture Series has been running since 1986. And all of the talks are archived, all the talks since 2005 are archived on the Walker website, and there's also a YouTube channel, which is walkerart.org/Insights Design Lecture Series, separated by hyphens. Insights is a partnership with the AIGA Minnesota, and I want to thank them for their continued collaboration, as well as Shapco, who every year generously donate the printing of the Insights posters. So they're floating around, and I encourage you to pick one up. The images for this year's Insights Identity, which you saw scrolling past, were sourced from the Minneapolis Public Library Picture Collection, which is a tear sheet material archive. And so in the spirit of this year's theme, which is collaboration, we are very pleased to sort of go analog and go to the library to source the images. Of course, in the spirit of this year's themes, Insights is very much a collaborative endeavor. So I also want to thank my team at the Walker Design Studio and our colleagues in marketing and content and communications, as well as our Walker event production team, who make everything run smoothly. Al and Josette have joined us again this week, and we thank them for ASL interpretation. Before I introduce Leila, I also want to highlight our upcoming, we have two more Insights programs. Next Tuesday on March 26th, Mitch Payon from Dia Studio will be here to discuss the intersection of brand, music, and motion. I think there may be a keyboard on stage. It's going to be very exciting. And on April 2nd, members of Twin Cities Zine Fest, which is celebrating its 20th year, will be here to talk about independent publishing. So I encourage you to come back for those. And then I also encourage you to join us after the talk for a reception in the lobby and more informal conversation. So tonight I'm thrilled to welcome Leila Taylor of the Brooklyn Public Library to the Walker. Libraries, like museums, are a public good. And in recent years, particularly in the wake of the COVID pandemic, more and more has been asked of our cultural institutions. They're at once places of information and access, but also of entertainment and social encounter. They serve as polling places and sites of protest, but also as durable archives and mechanisms of preservation. As the creative director at the Brooklyn Public Library, Leila is accountable to multiple publics in one of the largest library systems in the country. And the work of the library's in-house design studio cuts across ambitious exhibitions and outreach to the day-to-day needs of wayfinding, bookmarks, signage, and library cards. A variety of scales that we here in the Walker Design Studio can certainly relate to. But as if that weren't challenging enough, from July to December of 2023, the Brooklyn Public Library partnered with Roc Nation to mount the Book of HOV, a massive exhibition dedicated to the life and work of Jay-Z, who grew up in the Marcy houses not very far from the library's central branch. Tonight, we will find out what happens when both the world of celebrity and the general public arrive as institutional collaborators. Raised in Detroit and Cincinnati, Leila returns to the Midwest, having worked as a designer and creative director in New York for the better part of 3 decades. After earning her MFA from Yale in the early 2000s, She worked in the corporate sphere. Those of our colleagues who spend their time making annual reports, we see you. Her career also included a memorable stint at Lehman Brothers in 2008. And in 2015, she joined the Brooklyn Public Library and soon after took the perhaps unusual step of returning to graduate school at the New School to earn her MA in liberal studies while working full-time. The MFA thesis that resulted from that was published in 2019 as her first book, Darkly, Black History and America's Gothic Soul, with Repeater Books out of London, which is equal parts a memoir of growing up as a goth kid in Detroit and a trenchant analysis of the legacy of the transatlantic slave trade and the work of cultural mourning. She has since become a leading figure in Afrogoth discourse, and you can find her illustrated Zoom lectures online and her endorsement on the upcoming publication of the screenplay for Jordan Peele's Us. And she may also talk a little bit about it. She's in the middle of writing her second book now. As designers, often our very first mentors are our peers. And Leila also has the perhaps dubious distinction of being the first person I ever designed a book with. Long before I knew the difference between a point and a pica. I had no idea what I was doing. I don't remember a lot about that project. I do remember meeting up at a Williamsburg coffee shop to go over layouts, but I don't remember if we ever talked about music or scary movies. So perhaps tonight we can get around to that. And with that, I want to welcome Leila Taylor to the Walker. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And I was also delighted to see that those images came from the public library's clipping collection, because that is very dear to my heart. Okay, so I'll get to it because I have a lot of slides. So when Mark first approached me about talking about the Book of HOV, I was a little bit at a loss because we, the art and design department at Brooklyn Public Library, we didn't do it. We didn't design it. That whole part of the project was out of our hands. It was out of our control. But then I thought of all the ways that I, as a creative director, have to give up control, and all the other projects that we've done where instead of me leading, I kind of had to follow. So this talk is going to be about how we didn't design the biggest, most elaborate, most popular project that the library has ever done, and how I'm perfectly okay with that. So, as kind of Mark mentioned, Shawn Jay-Z Carter grew up in the Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood in Brooklyn. He was raised in the Marcy Projects, which is about 5 blocks away from the Marcy branch of the Brooklyn Public Library, or BPL, which I'll say from now on. And coincidentally, Jay-Z was born the year the Marcy branch opened in 1969. So that image on the right there is a reproduction of the sign at Marcy Houses. And it's one of thousands of objects that were on display at Central Library for the Book of HOV, a 40,000 square foot multimedia exhibition created and produced by Roc Nation. So as they say on the website, the exhibit explores Jay-Z's global impact as a musician, innovator, entrepreneur, and philanthropist. And by the way, the Brooklyn-based agency Linked by Air did the website, and coincidentally, they also did the signage and wayfinding for our Adam Street branch a couple of years ago. So that was a very happy coincidence for me. So how did this thing start? So last year was the 50th anniversary of hip hop, and library president Linda Johnson thought that Jay-Z would be the perfect honoree for the gala. So she's pitching this idea to Desiree Perez, who's Roc Nation CEO. And she said, I started listing all the reasons that the library was deserving. We're the most democratic institution in our society. We're free and open and accessible to everybody. Then all of a sudden, Desiree asks, how many square feet is that building? So Roc Nation had been thinking about what to do with this huge collection of material and artifacts, and they were looking for a place to show them. So where would you hold a museum-level exhibit if not a museum. And the only thing I can really compare this to, or this type of exhibit to, was the David Bowie Is show at the Brooklyn Museum, or the Taylor Swift Storyteller show at Museum of Arts and Design, in that they're both, contemporary musicians. Taylor Swift is still a working, professional musician, unlike David Bowie, R.I.P. And it's a show of artifacts and objects that make up their careers. But these shows are in museums, where you would expect an exhibition like this to be, and you have to pay to see it. And these kind of exhibits are not cheap. So the only thing I could think of that we did that was kind of like this, we had an exhibit of Lou Reed's swords. He has a collection of swords, which looks very humble now, but it seemed pretty rad at the time to me. So why a library? Like, why us? And for a start, it is completely free. It's a place that feels comfortable. It's not intimidating. A lot of people go to the museum, but a lot of people don't. So while we usually have some kind of art exhibit on display at any given moment, the scale and complexity of this was unlike anything we've ever done. And the fact that this had to exist in and around a space that it was not intended for, it still had to function with the least amount of interruptions or disturbances to the public, to the building, our services. It was still the library, and it still had to be the library. And that's not to say that we don't do large-scale, complex events that draw big numbers. Night in the Library, formerly Night of Philosophy, is one of our biggest programs. We actually just did it this past Saturday. It's a night of talks and films and performances and discourse. And one year we had 7,200 visitors to the event. This is pre-pandemic. I don't know what the numbers were for Saturday, but I think it might have been up there. But that's one night, once a year. And on average, just so you know, like on the busiest days, Central gets about 2,400 people on an average visit. So from its opening on July 14th through its closing on December 4th, 617,000 people came to Book of HOV. And on its last day, the busiest day, 10,867 people came through the door in one day. Sorry, just had like a weird PTSD flashback. So this free immersive experience was one of the only installations of its scope to be housed in an active public space. Keyword there, active public space. So all this is to say, this was by far the biggest thing the library has ever been a part of, and kind of uncharted territory for libraries in general. So let me tell you a little bit about the library. So when I tell people that I work for BPL, there's this assumption a lot of times that I'm a librarian. I'm not a librarian. But my job is to sort of tell people about the library and communicate our mission to folks. So that's what I'm going to do first. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the institution and the kind of work that we do there. So BPL is one of 3 library systems in New York City: Brooklyn, New York, and Queens. And a lot of people don't realize, even in New York, people don't realize that we're all completely different independent systems, 3 separate cards. We don't have like a pair of majestic lions named Patience and Fortitude, like NYPL. But we do have this really creepy eagle named Ingersoll, and the occasional little DJ pigeon. We've got 62 branches all over Brooklyn, 63 if you count the bookmobile. And that was actually one of the first projects I did when I started there, was wrapping the bookmobile, which just warmed my heart so much. We're the 6th largest public library system in the country. And in case you were wondering, Maricopa County in Arizona has the most, for whatever reason. We serve all 2.6 million people across the borough of every possible demographic. Our audience, our patrons, the people we make things for are literally everyone. and anyone, and I'm not being hyperbolic about that. Our clients, what we call our clients, are every internal department, and they each have their own specific audience. These aren't all of them, obviously, but these are the folks that we work with the most. And as Mark had mentioned, we make a lot of bookmarks. But essentially, we're one brand with a lot of different personalities. And our design department works on about 1,000 or more projects a year, ranging in size from like a flyer, to the Gala, to building signage. This is a terrifying shot of our current active jobs, which is making me really anxious. I don't know why I put this in there, but it's making me anxious. It is a high volume environment with a pretty small team of people who just work their butts off on this stuff. And our situation is pretty similar to most in-house departments, perhaps with a few other challenges. We've got a lot of different stakeholders, all with different audiences, needs, goals, expectations, budgets. So this was the Roc Nation team. These are all of the various agencies, designers, fabricators, vendors, producers who worked on Book of HOV, Tribe Design, who did the exhibition production design and management, also did the Super Bowl halftime show for last year, and I think the year before, maybe the year before that. So this is our design team. This is us. Rory's in parentheses because she's our intern, who will hopefully get back. But that's just to say that the idea of a program this complex and this big, focused on just one person for an audience primarily of fans of that one person is a little bit foreign to us. Like literally the last time we went all out for one person, it was for Walt Whitman's 200th birthday. And it was a blast. It was very fun. I would say for the most part, we do right by our clients. I think we do a pretty good job of solving their problems in the ways that, we as professionals think is best. But sometimes the public is the one leading, and we're the ones who have to kind of catch up and get on board. So a desire path is an informal pathway etched in the ground over time that's contrary to the intended design planned. Robert McFarlane calls them free will ways, which I kind of love. So it's design dictated by what people do, not what's designed for them. And I love desire paths because they're lessons. Sometimes what we as designers think is best or correct is sometimes not what people actually need or want. And a lot of what I do is about learning how the public actually uses our spaces and using that as a guide to what we should be doing to some degree. So for example, these were these old decommissioned phone booths that were just sitting outside the art and music section. The phones were taken out a long time ago. The doors are kind of wonky. They're kind of a little shaky overall. So they were going to take them away. But they're so charming. And we noticed that people would use them to make calls on their cell phones. They would kind of duck in there for a bit of privacy without disturbing other patrons. So instead, we wrapped them with this Douglas Adams poem called How to Leave the Planet. There's the phone number for the White House, for NASA. And actually, my boss and I did try the White House number, and it worked. And we just freaked out and hung up immediately. And one of the requirements for this project was that, one, it couldn't be opaque, and you had to be able to see into it, specifically from the waist down. So I will leave you to figure out why that is. So I just want to sort of situate us into where we are. Central is located between the neighborhoods of Prospect Park and Park Slope. It's across from Grand Army Plaza, which is sort of the entrance to Prospect Park. And Grand Army Plaza is a big gathering place. It's where everyone came to party after the election in 2020. We sit right in between these two major thoroughfares, Flatbush Avenue and Eastern Parkway, and they're both popular routes for protests and marches and parades. It's a hub. And the front of the building, we just call it the plaza. So this is in front of the building facing outwards. We kind of think of it as Brooklyn's front yard. And it's usually pretty active there, especially, when it's nice outside. We've got programming, like DJs and dancing. People hang out, eat lunch. People have wedding photos there. Then COVID happened. And Central, during COVID, was in the middle of a massive renovation project. So the lobby is an active construction site. So even if we wanted to let people in, even if we could have let people in, we couldn't because there was literally no floor on the lobby at the time. But then, sparked by the murder of George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter marches came to our front door. Our building became a backdrop to all of this activity. John Batiste put on this spontaneous concert on the front door. There were massive crowds on the plaza and around the library. It's summer, it's hot, people, you need to use the bathroom, but we can't let people in the building. So we put up this little sign sort of hoping that people would understand. We said libraries are spaces for gathering, discussion, and revolution. Black Lives Matter at BPL, and we welcome you to our plaza. There was going to be this really big, massive march coming up one weekend. And I got a text from my boss, who was the VP of Marketing and Communications at the time, because she had gotten a text from her boss, Linda Johnson, saying that we had to do something in support. We had to respond to this huge thing that was happening right outside of our door. And we had the weekend to come up with something. So after much slacking and brainstorming, our production manager, Jack, suggested we just put up these huge BLM letters in the windows. This is the trustees' room. So they came in and just taped these letters together with paper. And 4 years later, they're still there. They're still there to this day, in some form or another. In April of 2022, BPL announced the Books Unbanned project, a teen library access initiative in response to the growing campaign of book bans across the country. So anyone aged 13 to 21 can apply for a free BPL e-card, and that grants them access to our entire digital library collection. So when we got the brief for this, we only had about a week to come up with something. This thing moved really, really fast. So we kind of settled on kind of the obvious, stripes of black bars over text, the visual language of censorship. It's clear what it signified. It was black and white, so the palette of the printed word. It's something a 13-year-old could understand. And it looked good on a T-shirt, So we made all the things, posters and T-shirts and tote bags, social media graphics, bookmarks, of course. But then, Summer Bossamer, a 10th grade English teacher in Oklahoma, wrote the phrase, "Books the state doesn't want you to read," on red paper and taped it over the bookshelves of her classroom, along with a printout of the QR code linking to the Books Unbanned page of our website. She was suspended that day. A news anchor from Fox 25 in Oklahoma City had been tweeting about this as it was unfolding, and she posted the QR code. Then a bookstore owner in Norman, Oklahoma, made these kind of hippie-ish looking T-shirts with the QR code. A group of mothers made lawn signs with the code and the line, "Support our teachers." So it became clear that while we made some cool-looking T-shirts, the QR code was doing the real work. The code itself was the contraband. It was the scary thing giving teenagers access to information their parents didn't want them to have. Then on September 6th, it appeared in the New York Times op-ed section with Alex Kingsbury saying, "Only cowards ban books." So during Banned Book Week, and yes, that is a thing now, Banned Book Week, we projected the quote and the code on the facade of the building. So while we kind of thought we had it right the first time, we were happy with what we did, this QR code became part of the visual language of the brand, and really the most important part. And it's something that we never would have thought to make the focus of the brand. And I shouldn't say never. It might have come to us after a while with a little more time. But it took some folks out in Oklahoma to open our eyes to it. So we have these totems, these digital signs, these digital screens in front of Central. This was our campaign for Pride last year, Read Queer Books. Every once in a while, someone, don't know who, started overlaying these spray-painted stenciled messages on the screens. So our message was sort of illuminating their messaging. I had a wee heart attack when I first saw it because it took a very long time and a lot of money to make these. But whoever did it was kind enough to make it removable. They just peeled right off. And I had to admit that while, it was technically vandalism, it looked really cool. We took it down because, we had to, but I didn't mind it. Even though it was our work that was being covered up. It was pretty dope. The one in the middle there was the day that the Canadian wildfires brought this crazy smog over the city and the entire sky turned orange for a day. It was really weird. That's why it's so yellow looking. It was that day. Then this New Year's Eve, someone projected pro-Palestine messages calling for a ceasefire on the facade. Again, we didn't do it, but a lot of us appreciated the gesture. It's something we as an institution couldn't do. But the building provided a canvas for someone else to speak in a big public way, which is kind of what's happening here. The building was a blank page, an open book to tell someone else's story the way that it should be told. And this is just a sidebar, but I do a lot of talks, and they're mostly about horror movies and spooky things. So when I was putting this together, I just grabbed an old deck and was just replacing the images as I went, and these two just happened to be right next to each other, which seemed kind of meaningful to me in some way. Like, even the colors are kind of perfect. Anywho. So around March, we heard kind of rumblings of this exhibition. And so, of course, the first thing I wanted to know was what we'd be doing and how much time we would have to do it, if we were doing anything at all. So there are two components to this that were happening at the same time: the library card and the exhibition. So I'm going to talk about the card first. So as I had mentioned, the exhibit coincided with the 50th anniversary of hip hop. So we had created this campaign that we really liked, borrowing sort of the imagery of graffiti, this sort of halftone effect with the images, these bright, bright colors. Graffiti artist Mass did a custom tote bag for us. So we're just sort of dipping our toe into what was going to be a year-long campaign. And part of that would have been to make a special library card. And we've had, special library cards before. We currently have a Where the Wild Things Are card. We had an open call for artists to submit a design for a Black History card. So we're trying to figure this out. In YPL and Queens, they both had cards for this. But when Jay-Z got into the picture, it was clear that that was just going to blow everything out of the water. It was going to be a Jay-Z card, which I thought, okay, that seems cool. They did a Lou Reed card at NYPL. So I was imagining, it'd be something like that. It was also determined really quickly that we weren't going to do it, that Roc Nation was doing it, which was disappointing at first. So we're waiting with bated breath for their design, for their card. And we're expecting one card. And they came back with layouts for 13, one for each solo album. And we just laughed and was like, that's insane. That's impossible. I don't know how this could work. We're thinking one, of course, and then maybe two. Like, one could be a general card and one could be just for Marcy. We fought back, maybe even begged a little bit, but no, it was going to be 13 library cards, which seemed absolutely insane logistically. Could you have more than one active card on an account? How would they be distributed to the branches? How do we communicate how this works to the public? How do we communicate this to the librarians? And this is just one of many, many memos from the Customer Experience Department, just explaining to librarians the process of signing people up for one of these cards, like what you would do in this. It was very complicated. Every branch would have a different card, so there needed to be signage that they could put up so people knew where to get which card. Again, this was a long, technical, complicated, logistical problem that multiple departments of the library had to get involved in to solve this problem. So we're thinking, is this even worth it? And of course we were wrong, and the cards became this huge must-have item, which is amazing to me, that our library card would be this collectible, valuable, must-have item. And of course it ended up on eBay, which I find ironic because it's free. The whole point of library cards is that they're free. And then Christie's auctioned off a special autograph case with proceeds going to the library. So I think it ended at like $100,000, so that's going to us. So we're like, all right, fine with me. So meanwhile, there is this mysterious BPL project looming for the exhibition. And I started panicking a little bit about what was going to be asked of us. You know, I knew Roc Nation had a whole team of people working on this. But what about the stuff that we need that they might not think of? You know, what about the patrons who just want to pick up a book they have on hold and care nothing about Jay-Z? You know, what would the staff at Central and the librarians at the branches need? So we're working on the same project but separately with different needs and different expectations. And on top of that, it was a secret. So Jay-Z had no idea that this was happening. He wouldn't know until the opening that this even existed. But what was this going to look like? What would people think the library was paying for it? Which they didn't, not a dime. Would it disrupt the day-to-day workings of the library? Would it just take over everything? You know, I had concerns, to say the least. But things started to get really real when that vinyl went up on the entire facade of our building. So Central, the main branch, was designed in 1935 to kind of evoke an open book. The entrance, or the spine, faces Grand Army Plaza. It's sort of flanked by these columns covered in gold leaf etchings that depict the evolution of art and sciences throughout the ages. And in the middle, above the doors, are these somewhat antiquated literary figures on the gate. There's classics, there's Moby Dick, there's Meg from Little Women, there's Poe's Raven, Tom Sawyer. Then there's good old Archie and Mehitabel, Natty Bumppo, and some guy named Richard Henry Dana Jr. You know him, whoever he is. Quotes from the first president of the library board, Roscoe Conkling Ensign Brown, cover the facade, for example. Here are enshrined the longing of great hearts and noble things that tower above the tide, the magic word that winged wonder starts, the garnered wisdom that never dies. And like no shade to Roscoe Brown, this is exactly what you would expect on the facade of a cultural institution in 1941. Inscribed along the Flatbush Avenue side are words of Thomas Carlyle, Goethe, Francis Bacon, Shakespeare, Alexander Smith, Joseph Conrad. For example, I go into my library and history rolls before me. I breathe the morning air of the world while the scent of Eden's roses yet linger on it. I see the pyramids building. I hear the shouts of the armies of Alexander. So it's all kind of appropriately grand and poetic in kind of a municipal way, and exactly what one would expect. And it's a lot of dead white men with beards, which is why this is extraordinary to me and to a lot of people. So the plan. This is actually straight from their deck. So we're getting little bits and pieces of information about this exhibition. And question remained for me, what were we gonna do? So while the marketing team, and this is our marketing team, they're taking like 8 a.m. meetings with Roc Nation, and they're grinding away on the PR and the communication strategy, the social media strategy, and responding to just epic long email threads. We, the design team, were kind of like girding our loins, waiting for whatever was gonna happen next. So we would wrap the exterior of the building in white and apply black type stylistically across the wrap. General Idea was the agency who did this. So we hear this, and our first response is like, what? Like, how? Like, what? How is this possible? And it seemed kind of impossible. It was so beyond the scope of anything that we could have done. It was so all-encompassing. And it was a lot, you know. We had concerns. What would the public response be? Would it damage the limestone? This is a landmark building. And getting approval from the Landmarks Public Commission takes forever, if they would even approve it. And we're kind of positive that they'd say no, and that would be it. But of course, they said yes. And I'm just gonna fast forward through this, but they brought in a team to rappel down the sides of the building at night, putting this wrap up. Let's see if I can just go scooch, scooch, scooch. Go, go, go. They had to build that deck, that platform on the plaza. Faster, faster, faster. Yeah. So the exhibit hadn't been announced to the public because, again, Jay-Z doesn't know it exists. So there were rumors that maybe there was this secret Jay-Z pop-up concert happening. It kind of looked like there was a stage being built on the plaza. So before it was even open, there was this buzz that was starting to happen, which was overwhelmingly positive. There were some criticisms. This person suggested Barbra Streisand, maybe, Lou Diamond. Lou Reed, of course. I love that they specified that Neil Diamond was a singer-songwriter, in case we didn't know. And I also find it interesting about this comment about a vulgar choice, because that came up a few times, and the people who criticized it. There is no profanity in that building, on the facade. We're not stupid. Roc Nation isn't stupid. There is no profanity or vulgar language in the text on that facade. Then they were wondering if they could create a video cube in front of the building to showcase music videos. And again, we're kind of going, what? What did that mean to the library? It all felt kind of too much. That the library was dedicating so much room and so much focus to one person. But, you know, they did it. This is just a snippet of the video. I think it's 2 minutes long in general, so I'm just going to give you a little taste. But that's 12 feet by 12 feet. It's a very big video cube. Then they said we're going to wrap the walls of the atrium in a graphic mural. Can we wrap the ceiling? I don't know. Can you wrap the ceiling? I have no idea. So, okay, we did something like this. We used to have this mural that spanned the length of the mezzanine, that top tier. And then every once in a while, we'll have an art exhibit where they'll do a vinyl sort of on that curved area below. This is Molly Crabapple. So this is what it normally looks like. And this is what it became. The tower, this is Picasso. That's also a video. So that was a constantly running video screen. So the plan was really this complete transformation of some of these spaces. This is the new and noteworthy section, sort of a browsing area with bits of every kind of collection. That would become this gallery space. This is the youth wing. That's Isaac Mizrahi reading Where the Wild Things Are to some kids. That would become this gallery. They were going to create an exact replica of Baseline Studios in the Info Commons classroom, which normally looks like this, and it became that. This area used to be Brooklyn Collections, and it's where the history reference material and maps and things were, but we're doing some renovations, so this area was completely empty, like nothing was happening here. And probably this was the biggest transformation. So this is the plans. Black floor, black walls, black ceiling. The walls behind are all video. This is all video. Then there was this sort of long hallway in the brightly lit blue with this sort of room showing a video behind it. It was a lot. So we're seeing these plans, and the cards are being produced. And all of these things are out of our control. But the one thing we can control is how we communicate what's happening to the public and to the staff. And how do we help navigate people through this? You know, how do we ensure our regular patrons that we're still the library? And how do we communicate to people there only for Jay-Z that we are also a library? So like finally it's our time to shine. And I just call this the boring part. So we knew that there was this freight train of an exhibition coming towards us that affected every aspect of the library, every department of the library. So we're preparing for this as best we can, anticipating what we might need, which was a lot of signage. People get very angry when they can't get into the library when and how they want. And access was going to be limited. So there was just this constant flow of posters on A-frame holders telling people which direction to go and what was going to be closed. And also, we still don't know what it's going to look like. We can't really brand it Book of HOV because we don't know what that brand is. But we knew it was a bit special and it fit into this kind of different category for promotion. So we switched to black and white, which we use for most of our special programming. You know, it's still us. You know, it's still the library communicating to the public about library-related things. And then finally, Book of HOV. We start seeing the branding. And they're sharing it with us a little bit at a time, what they've been working on, so we could finally see this thing, them being General Idea. And then we started seeing what Link by Air was working on with the website. And then I started to relax. I thought, okay, this is cool. Like, this is gonna be good. And I stopped worrying about it, and I kind of started getting excited about it. BPL Blue kind of became Jay-Z Blue, which is Pantone 285. Our branding for this event, our signage was going to be black and white, Proxima Nova, our font. So we wanted some indication of where HOV ended and where BPL began at any given moment. And we wanted to make it really obvious to people working in that space who was a librarian. And we wanted people to sign up for library cards. So finally it opens. This is a video that Roc Nation did of the opening day event.
They counted us out. They didn't think that we would make it.
It breaks my heart.
Oh, but I know God did.
Where we at, go?
Yes, He did.
Where we at, go?
That's right. But I know God did.
Jesus turned water to wine for Hov, it just took a stove. You never know how this shit could go. Me and Biggs probably got too big if they ain't booked that low. Hindsight is 2020. Though he's getting plenty money, looking back now the shit is funny. I just got $1 million off a sink without risking a million years trying to get it out the sink. Whole big. They say they don't know me internationally, niggas on the road did. I see a lot of Hov in gigs. Me and me can never beef. I freed that nigga from a whole big. Hov did. Next time we have a discussion, who the GOAT, you donkeys know this. Forgive me, that's my passion talking. Sometimes I feel like Farrakhan talking to Mike Wallace. I think y'all should keep quiet. Breaks my heart.
They
God did.
us down. Ooh,
Come on, man. Come on.
but look at us now. Oh, they counted us out.
So that was the party that I got to go to. So then it finally opens to the public. And this was needless to say, this is not usual for us. We've never seen anything like this before. So we're getting crowds like this, like every day, like really big crowds. So we had to adapt really rapidly to what was happening on the floor. You can see our naively simplistic line forms here sign. which got a little more complicated, and then a little bit more information was needed, and a little bit more information was needed. What we didn't think of is that not everybody knows what you need to get a library card. You have to have a photo ID and proof of residence in New York State. And we didn't anticipate how many people would come from out of town expecting to go home with a Jay-Z card. You know, people would give like the address of A, B, and B they were staying, or a relative. People would be in line for hours just to be told you can't have one. That's not how it works. There'd be people who came all the way from Texas thinking they're going home with a library card with Jay-Z on it. And the poor librarians had to just say no. So speaking of, as this exhibit is going along, there is this constant adjustment being made on what was happening and what they had to communicate to people and how they're dealing with this. So every day I'd walk in the door and there'd be another sort of handmade sign up, or they'd take a sign that we designed and reduce it down in a weird way. And again, I give so much credit to the people who actually were dealing with this. They don't have time to put in a job request for MAC, for the marketing communications department, for us to make a sign. So we would catch them and we'd try to tidy them up as much as we could. And this is sort of ongoing thing with the library, and I think all libraries everywhere, is the homemade signs. And, we have a system, we have templates. We try to keep the brand consistent as much as possible across all of these branches all over Brooklyn. But I also realize we don't have to be perfect. We're not the Apple Store, we're the public library. Every neighborhood has its own character, every branch has its own personality, and I don't want to take that warmth from them and the individuality from them, because we wouldn't get stuff like this. And this is awesome. I love this so much. And by the way, those two little posters and the signs are things that we did. They're there, but we would never have done that. And I am so glad that it exists. And speaking of people making their own stuff, Roc Nation was really insistent that we not make merch. Really, the library card is the merch, and they really wanted to be clear that this is not a commercial endeavor. But, people are gonna people, and people want merch. And I respect the hustle, and I bought one, so they got kind of close. So to kind of wrap this up, this got more press than anything we've ever done. Maybe Books Unbanned. I think this might have beaten it. All of my worries were unwarranted, and the response from the public was overwhelmingly good. And we got the single best free advertising moment we could have ever gotten. Yeah. A lot of us, that was the thing we cared about most, is that Beyonce was going to be at the opening. And the show had meaning to people in ways that I didn't consider while we were in the thick of it. For example, this little bit here. We don't always see Black stories like Jay-Z's take over everyday public spaces. Every time people go to get other books, maybe it'll encourage them to remember that our stories exist in the library too. And I'm gonna do a little plug. Speaking of other stories, I am the creative director for the library, but I'm also a writer. As Mark mentioned, this is my first book, Darkly Black History in America's Gothic Soul. And I wrote it while I was working at the library. So when I saw it on our shelves, it made me really proud to actually have it in our catalog, and that my voice has a place there too. And the other thing I wanted to note is that I kept saying through all this, is this too much? Is this too much? But then I thought of how many times marginalized communities are told, don't be too much, don't be too loud, be quieter, don't take up too much space, don't be too accomplished, don't have too much money, don't have too much influence, don't have too much power. So I'm seeing this huge exhibit is taking over this space. And at first when I thought, oh, this is too much, and now I'm kind of like, no, it's fine. It's just the right amount for what it is. So, what did we get out of this? We had a 358 increase in new accounts opened. Almost 40,000 of those patrons were new card holders. And this is kind of the important one here. Nearly 24% of new Book of HOV card holders had already used their library cards. Thank you. So this was not without its critics. Some people asked, should a public library facing budget cuts be used as a shrine to a billionaire? Someone in the New York Times called it an ode to aspirational celebrity extravagance, which I can see. But this one criticism bugged me. It's worth noting that on the other side of the East River, the main branch of the New York Public Library currently hosts an exhibit of Charles Darwin's letters, while a show at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture presents art by incarcerated people. These more traditional exhibitions adhere to a public library's longstanding mission. And I wanted to ask, what do you think the mission is? Because I know what our mission is, it's on our website, to ensure the preservation and transmission of society's knowledge, history, and culture, and to provide the people of Brooklyn with free and open access to information for education, recreation, and reference. So that's what we think. And just to, not to be, snarky or whatever, but as previously mentioned, we already did the thing for a 200-year-old black man. We already had the big extravaganza. And in 2015, we had an exhibit called The House That Herman Built, about Herman Wallace, who spent over 4 decades in solitary confinement in Angola prison. In 2019, we had an exhibit of art made for incarcerated people called Photo Requests from Solitary. And we are currently finishing up our 5th issue of Bridges, a zine made with work by and for incarcerated people. So, just saying. Thank you. So this was funny. The vinyls finally started peeling like 2 days after it closed. It was like it was sentient, like it knew it was time to come down. And we had our facade back, and the library was in our hands once more. So we may not have designed it, but we did make and do things that matter. Those people who came back after the show, who actually used their library cards, that was us. That was the work of the marketing and communications people. We made the utilitarian stuff, the facts, the rules, making sure our logo looked right on the cards. While it might be not be sexy, it is important. Those things printed on 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper, which, by the way, if you would want one of those flyers, you can probably find one on eBay. So, thank you.
Thanks so much. It was just great to see that, and struck so many chords with us at the Walker because stanchion signs are something we think about a lot sometimes. But I have a favorite quote that I often think about, and it's a little bit of a puzzle, but I do think about it a lot. The sort of critic Michael Warner has this one-liner, which is, who wrote this great book called Publics and Counterpublics. He has this one-liner, which is, a public is constituted by virtue of being addressed. So a public doesn't exist out there somewhere. It takes a mode of address in order to constitute a public. It's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem. And so I think, I often think about that, right? Does the party exist before the flyer, or does the flyer make the party exist, And so I wanted to ask you, how this experience, your many years as a designer, how has this changed or shaped your understanding of a notion of a public?
Well, one thing that I learned from working there is I have really bad judgment for predicting what people are going to like. A lot of times in my own, my own design education and my own design knowledge, I kind of think I know best in a lot of ways. But what I realized is what people need and what people want is not necessarily what I think they need or want, or what I need or what I want. Like one of our biggest events is called the People's Ball, and it's sort of an anti-Met Gala where anyone can kind of come in, they dress it to the nines, they have fantastic costumes and outfits and everything, and they get to walk, runway. And because I'm kind of an introvert and I dress like this all the time, I sort of think, like, why? Okay, I guess somebody would want that. And it's so popular and people absolutely love it because it's a time for anyone to get up on a stage and start their stuff and look fantastic and come up with the best outfits ever. And I was like, yeah, people need that kind of stuff, So I think a lot of times what I've learned at the library is really kind of to listen. And because the audience is so broad and every neighborhood is so different from each other, so many different languages as well, the librarians at those branches know more than I do. They know their population, they know their patrons, they know what they need more than I do. So a lot of this job has been humbling. And I kind of had to realize, I actually have to listen to what people are actually doing and what they're actually reacting to and giving them sort of what I think is the best version of what they need, instead of just automatically giving them what I think is right,
Yeah, these are questions that we often, contemporary art is sometimes not for everyone, right? But the Walker, is an incredibly welcoming place with an abundance of programming and many different things. And so I think we always are very reflexive about the assumptions we make about our publics. And it's something that I think in our work, we're always sort of reflecting back on. We have this wonderful, we walked through the galleries this afternoon, and Sadie Barnett is welcoming people to the Walker every Thursday night for a fully functioning bar. And so, that's bringing a different public around that project that might come for something else. So it's something we really think about all the time. I do want to plug one more time your book, Darkly, which I have my copy here, which I highly recommend. And I've also had sort of a sidebar as a writer and write about design and have that in my background. And I wanted to hear a little bit more. This is a world of, we're in a room of professionals, and you made this very unique decision to sort of accept a new job and also pursue, a second graduate degree and writing a book while working a new job. So I wanted
unique is a nice way of
I wanted you to talk, and also, I'm incredibly inspiring on the one hand, but also just interested to hear you talk a bit about that decision, where you were at your career when you made that decision and how that sort of happened and sort of what you're working on now. Maybe that'll be a transition into handing it out to the group.
I was doing a lot of very corporate work. A lot of my clients were, investment banks, pharmaceutical companies, and I was kind of done. I was kind of done doing that kind of work. And I had my eye on this job at the library. I knew not my immediate predecessor, but the person who had the job before them. And I just kind of had my eye on this position waiting for it to open up. But before that, I kind of made the decision that I needed to go back to school to write because I loved writing. And I was doing all of this sort of cultural critique stuff and, I'm trying to get published and it's not working. And I'm realizing I kind of don't know what I'm doing. And I needed to change. I just needed a really big change. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do it. I applied for the new school for the liberal studies program. And then the job at the library opened up and I thought, oh God, well, this is my dream job. I can't not apply to this. So I applied to both, not knowing which one I was going to get, and I ended up getting both. And I just said, "All right, I'm doing both, I guess," and that's what I did.
I mean, I can imagine it took a lot of discipline. I mean, we were talking about it earlier, like, you're in a Google Doc on the train on your phone writing. Like, just talk a little bit about that process and how you managed your time. I mean, we're already so busy as professionals. I mean,
yeah, I'm really envious of writers who have like a regular writing practice, because it really was any time I had available, I was reading and writing. So it was on the bus at lunchtime when I could sneak in a little bit during the day. When I got home, I'd maybe, watch a half an hour of TV, get something to eat, and then it was just read and write for another 5 hours or so. So that was just constant for about 3 years. And it really was, I didn't have this, all right, I'm going to spend 2 hours every day in the morning with my cup of tea and in front of my window and write for a while and then go to work. It was really just whenever I could get time and do it. And fortunately for me, I kind of tend to work well in random spaces. Oddly enough, I work really well on public transit, and I don't know why. But yeah, thank goodness for Google Doc, because that's where all of my stuff is.
can you tease a little bit of what you're working on now? Because we talked about it a little bit last night, and if you talk about that, then we can kind of open it up.
So it's called Sick House, and it is about how horror movies or the horror genre subverts and perverts our ideas of home. So it's sort of about the architecture of dread, really. So it's looking at horror films and horror books, sort of famous horror houses and scenarios. There's a chapter on brutalism. There's a chapter on witch houses. There's a chapter I'm working on called Madhouses. Like I'm going to talk about, Ed Gein and things like that. So it's kind of dark. But yeah, it's about architecture and our ideas of what home actually means and how horror kind of twists that and plays with it. Yeah.
Well, I'm quite happy to open it up for questions. This is like amazing talk, so I'm sure people will want to know more.
Excellent, amazing talk. It was, even from Minneapolis, it was really exciting to watch all of that work roll out in real time. So kudos to riding that rocket ship all the way. So as a creative, how did it feel to have to function as Roc Nation's reality check?
It was hard at first because it was like, this would have been such an amazing opportunity. It would have been so exciting and so different. But I also knew really quick, we cannot do this. There's no way that we could have handled this project. So as soon as I kind of learned that they're going to be doing everything, I was like, okay, I good. I'm glad with that. Like, for example, I didn't mention this, but the Gala invitation, it's kind of the one fancy thing we do a year. It's kind of our one chance to use really good printing and use really good paper and things like that. And we do it every year. And we had been planning on doing it this year. So, a designer did various versions and comps, and we're working on it. And it got really close to, getting estimates. Like, it got approved from our development team. But because Jay-Z was the honoree for the gala, they had to look at it, and they basically said, you know what, we'll do it. So all of that work, and they were like, okay, you do it. So we kind of just had to let it go. It just had to be like, this isn't our time for this particular thing, and we just had to move on and just let it go.
Thank you so much for that. And congratulations on your book. Are you signing copies later?
Sure.
Okay. Fantastic. It was really interesting to hear about this story through your lens and that journey. And some of the themes that came to me were things about adaptation, like the free paths and how you apply that to other things. We don't always know what needs are and how, what we think a need might be, how will other people, what really are their needs. And then you talked about we couldn't control everything. These are some pretty good life lessons in here. We couldn't control everything, but we could control communication. And I think what I heard you say is we could control the communication and help people navigate this experience. And that's the thing I'm really interested in hearing more about is, can you say more about helping the community, the existing and maybe the new community, navigate it, including things like, for example, when you show images of the space, it looks different and it presents differently than how you normally present.
Yeah. I kind of saw our role as a little bit as mediators between Roc Nation and the staff, and between sort of the exhibit and the public. I think we're kind of this translators that kind of had to kind of give out information to different groups of people who have different needs. Like what we had to tell Roc Nation, for example, you know, when they put skins over the bookshelves in the youth wing, and I saw that and I was like, where are the end caps gonna go? Like where's the section sign? Just make sure they have section signage. For people who didn't care about the exhibition, we really had to communicate. And a lot of this was through, you know, the emails and through social media and things, all the ways that the library is still open. And also saying, you know, we know that this is an inconvenience. We know that this is a big, big change, and we're listening to you, and we're doing the best that we can. But yeah, a lot of it was having to play this sort of dance between doing what needed to be done to support the exhibition and doing what needed to be done to support the Roc Nation team, and doing what needed to be done for people who didn't care about this at all, and also acknowledging that that audience is important too. So that's why it was a lot of signage. I mean, and that was a tiny bit of it. But I think what was really important is we needed the public to be listened to and know that they were listened to. Because like I said before, people get really, really mad when they can't get into their library, you know? So we just kind of had to keep communicating what was happening all the time to make sure that they understood what was happening, which was a lot.
Thank you. I just have a question around the idea of the library as a platform. You kind of talked about how this was a unique opportunity that you guys kind of jumped on. And this is a new way that the library showed up in the world. Has that now opened up new avenues to explore what the library can be? Or are you guys just like tightening down, we reached the pinnacle, no more risks?
I think no more of that. I think that's probably the last time we're going to do that. But what I actually think is a lot of people don't know what the library actually is. And this isn't that far from what we are. I think there's a kind of a rather narrow view of what the library is. And a lot of people actually don't understand or don't know all of the different kind of services that we have. So, you know, I think like we have a like no shushing thing, like we don't shush, you know, and I think people think of libraries as being kind of quiet places or places that are serious. I don't think people think of libraries as being popular, you know, but there is so much that we do besides just books that have to do with, again, kind of reacting to what's happening with the public. Like one of my favorite programs is there's a musical instrument lending library. If you decide you want to learn the violin, you can check out a violin and take it, you know? If you have a whole bunch of like analog stuff, if you have a bunch of like records or cassettes or something, you can get them all digitized for free at the library, my favorite thing. You know, if you want to learn a language, anything. But so there's a lot of different things that we do that people don't know about. So in a way, I think this kind of was this crash course in what libraries actually are now versus what people actually think. Like it was an extreme version of what libraries can do. But I think it's actually closer to what we are than people think it is, you know. No, sorry.
So great job to you guys. But as a professional, how did you navigate those conversations when people were saying like the black incarceration exhibits were fine, but the black billionaire exhibit was unpleasant and unwanted? So like, how did you navigate those conversations as a professional?
We don't respond to them, honestly. Yeah, I mean, it is. I think we might have seen those things. I mean, there's times when those kind of critiques matter. When they matter from the public, if they matter from patrons, if it's getting over and over and over again, you know, some New York Times writer, you know, that wasn't a New York Times writer, but that was press. And we don't necessarily have to answer to or address all of that press. That was my way of like getting back at it, you know. But yeah, I think there's one of those things where it was like we hear it and we take what we need, we use what is useful, but we also know who we are and what we do, and I think we kind of just feel like we don't have to necessarily answer to all that critique all the time, honestly.
Thank you for this, sharing your experience with this project. Oh, am I getting a hold? No. I had heard that general ideas, the creative direction portion of this from Roc Nation. I'm right here.
Oh, there you go. I was like, where's this voice coming from?
I'd heard that they had a 7-month lead time to put this on, and sounds absolutely wild to me. I'm wondering if you had a similar, sort of scope and timeline of this, and also really within this swirl and all this uncertainty, how you approached leading your team through that and sort of managing all of those sort of unknowns and expectations and, sort of managing the utilitarian side, like you said, of this really sexy, flashy, celebrity-oriented experience.
Yeah, all of the work that they were doing was so far ahead from by the time we got it. So by the time we started seeing those plans, they had already figured things out. So again, like we didn't know what was happening until March. We probably didn't actually start making like that signage and stuff until like a couple of months before it was about to open, I'm guessing. But yeah, no, all of that stuff was happening without our knowledge, so we didn't know. And actually, for me as the creative director, a lot of times I'll take the grunt work sometimes, because I also knew that a lot of times it isn't fun as a designer just having to do other people's design and work on other people's production stuff. And I knew that it was going to be a pretty simple system. It was really going to be, we have a template for these things, and we just have to keep going and put them out. So a lot of times, it really wasn't our entire team who was doing it. A lot of time it was just me and maybe one other designer. Because for better, for worse, we weren't a part of it, or the design team wasn't a part of this, and they were really, really, really busy with other things. So it was one of those where I kind of took one for the team, so to speak, because it's kind of a bummer to be have something kind of teased in front of you that you can do and then taken away. I mean, the harder thing was probably for the designer who was working on the Gala invite, because that's the juicy one good thing, So having that taken away was a little bit of a bummer, but she understood, and the next super cool thing we do was going to go immediately to her, But yeah, there were some disappointing things and a lot of just relief, because it was all kind of intimidating too. So I think all of us were a little bit relieved that we weren't going to be doing it,
Yeah, this is kind of a little bit on what you talked about before, of this like dichotomy of what a library is supposed to be. And I remember when I visited, it felt uniquely like a library, like walking into it and like you see these words immediately when it greets you. And like, that's the feeling that I remember having as a kid of going to the library, is like words meaning something. And then to like see people walk in and like you're seeing kids walk out with books, and they might not be what you think is a library book, but they're walking out with the book, right? So like, that's still kind of like this idea of like, I think this notion of like, what is a library supposed to be speaks a lot to how people think, like who patronizes a library. And so I'm wondering, like, if you can speak a little bit from your perspective as like a designer of like seeing how Roc Nation came in and they have this idea of how do we make this a museum, of like, what are some of like the design aspects that you're thinking of like, no, like this is actually still uniquely library. Are you taking this into like future projects?
Yeah, I mean, I think there were a couple of moments that that really, really worked. Like there was one area, I mean, the good thing is the spaces that were transformed, there were only a couple of spaces that were kind of interrupted. A lot of the spaces weren't even in use. Like the new and noteworthy section, it isn't a main collection. It's sort of a sample of a different collections. For the youth wing area, that was still active. That was an active space where people could check out books, right? So seeing how they were willing, how they understood that, and they actually got it. You know, the things that I was worried that they wouldn't understand, they did understand. And they were able to do what they needed to do while still letting the space function as it was supposed to function. And I think the other thing is they knew that this was an asset to them. They knew that this being in the library was actually a bonus, was a good thing for them. So I don't think it wasn't about them trying to pretend it wasn't a library and it was a museum. It was about them realizing that, oh, this belongs in a library and it's important that it's in a library. So while it might have taken up a lot of space, the regular happenings of getting books or having services happened, you know, without any interruption, you know. And I think they knew that. And I think that the reason, I think one of the decks, they said something like, there's an inherent story in the library or something. And the idea that the building itself is a book and the building itself is telling a story of this person. I mean, I think they got it. I think they understood the value of having this in a library, and that the overwhelming response from people was like, I can't believe the library is doing that. This is so amazing that this is in the library. It's free, 100% free, yeah.
Hi. This is a mundane question, but do you know what Roc Nation's budget was?
No idea.
Okay. In case I want to put one of these on.
We will probably actually never know. But do know the library did not pay a cent. None of it came out of library budget. It was all, they paid for everything.
I just want to compliment you on your banned book program and how it evolved. And I have one other question. When in the process was Jay-Z finally told that you were doing this all? And what was his response?
The opening. You know, I think, I'm not exactly sure, but I think he was told something like, oh, the library's going to do a special thing for the 50th anniversary of hip hop for you. And he was like, great. But no, I think it was the opening. He loved it. He absolutely loved it. He was delighted by it. And the really nice thing was the day after the opening. So the opening is like the big fancy thing, you know, that's invite only and all that stuff. But the day after, when it was open, he came back and was sort of like walking around, and he walked around the sort of mezzanine area, and people who happened to be there, you know, saw him and were cheering, and like he was waving and everything, which was a really, really sweet moment. But yeah, also he donated a ton of books from his personal library. He donated every album he sampled. So there are like 300 albums that he donated to our collection from like every time he used to sample. And a lot of money. So they get to give us stuff. So we have, you know, his books, his albums, and his cash. Yeah.
Really relatable challenge in not necessarily knowing what will resonate with your audiences or being able to predict what they'll react to, what they'll really enjoy. I wonder, based on that experience, how you seek insights from your audiences today, or maybe how you work toward trying to crack closer to that challenge, or if this experience has shaped how you seek audience insights differently.
Yeah, I mean, I think I listen a lot. I listen a lot sooner. I think a lot of times, sometimes an idea will come, or a project will come, or a brief will come, and I'll kind of already start, like wheels are turning out, like this could be cool, or I could do this, or that could be neat. And I think now I listen first more, a lot more, and a lot of times I realize I am not the audience for a lot of the stuff that we do. You know, I am not the audience for, our story times. I'm not the audience for our drag queen story hour, but I love that it exists and I'll promote the heck out of it. But I'm not the particular audience for it. I wasn't the audience for this exhibit. This wasn't, necessarily my thing, but I think it's really just about being open, and being open to things that aren't comfortable and things that aren't familiar, and realizing that just because it's not familiar to me doesn't mean it's not the basic, traditional, everyday thing for somebody else, And the thing with working in the library is there's so many different audiences that are not me. There's the Justice Initiative people, there's the people who are learning English, there are migrants who are coming. There are so many different audiences that have experiences that I don't. So it's really important to just sort of listen to the experts who do know their audience, and paying attention to that sooner, I would say. Yeah.
So just curious, because you embarked on two paths at the same time, how did you maybe find them interweaving and maybe influencing your decisions? Because as you're speaking about like all the things that aren't for you, right? Like, did you see an opportunity maybe? Or, I mean, I'm just thinking like seeing your book in their catalog must have just been such a good feeling. And kind of going off that, if you could curate any show on anything, what would that be?
It'd be about gothy, dark, spooky things. Actually, the Night in the Library event that I kind of spoke of, that was Saturday, the theme was called Out of Darkness, which had a kind of macabre, but also kind of intriguing kind of theme. So I did a talk for that on this French architect, Etienne Boulay. He did a cenotaph, a memorial to Isaac Newton back in like 1786. So a lot of times I'm able to take the things that I'm interested in and explore them at the library, in library functions. And also I think the easiest thing, but it's just a very supportive atmosphere for writers. There are a lot of library staff who write books, who are authors. And sort of being in that environment is just helpful. It's helpful that it's incredibly humane work hours. It is 9 to 5. I couldn't have done this if they didn't have really humane work hours and I didn't have an understanding boss who respected the process of writing. So I think being in the atmosphere is the thing that was the most supportive. But I think if I had to curate my own event, it'd be a lot of like cemeteries and horror movies and creepy Halloween things. Cemetery tours. I love a cemetery tour. Yeah.
If there's one more burning question, we can.
No pressure. I was just, obviously you were going through a lot of roller coaster of emotions with, the partnership with Roc Nation, but through that, how did you also lead your team? Because they probably were also going up and down. So like, you seem like you'd be a good boss and like thoughtful person, but like, do you have any memories of just like them being demoralized and like how you protect them or handle that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, because it took a toll. It was because it really did kind of take over everything. And even the people who weren't working on it immediately were still kind of in the thick of it as well. So I think a lot of it was giving people breaks, acknowledging that we know that this is weird. And one of the things I promised them was, when this is over, no big projects, no big initiatives. We're going to pause. We're just going to catch up on that massive job list. So one of the things I can do for them is give them some breathing room, because they need it. And one thing that the library did, the higher ups, is they had a special party for all of the staff at Central who had to deal with. So we had our own sort of evening with like a private viewing of the whole exhibition, and there was booze and food and music and everything. So they gave us a thank you party, which was nice. And we all got our own set of JC library cards. So that's nice.
Perfect.
So I still have that. I have that.
Yeah. That's your savings account right there.
I know,
So
right?
good.
Holding on to that.
All right. I want to thank everybody for coming. I mean, I had a great time in this. And typically what we do is we adjourn to the Bazinet lobby. There's a bar, and we, have more informal chit chat, so we can continue the conversation up there. Again, I want to encourage you to come back for the next two, each Tuesday in the next 2 weeks. And thank you again for coming. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.